Today we're going to be looking at what's possibly going to be the busiest Incus release of the year. That's Incus 6.13, our latest monthly release. I'm Stefan Greber, I'm the project leader for Linux containers and one of the maintainers of Incus. So let's go through everything that's new in this release. And as I said, this is quite a long list. Alright, so after skipping through, just a quick note that we've changed the way we handle OCI image unpacking for in this Incus release, effectively removing an external dependency. So just a note for packages there. We get to the actual new features in here. The main one, and something we've been looking at doing for probably years at this point, but finally got to something that seems to work well enough, is with support for running the Incus VM agent on Windows. So that allows for execution of commands, transferring files, and basic information retrieval around what the operating system and version and details are within Windows. It doesn't cover everything our agents can normally do, but it's a good place to start, and we hope to find folks with more Windows experience than we have to take it further and make it easier to install, more featureful as well. Next, we've got quite a few improvements to our incus-migrate standalone tool. So that's the tool that acts as P2C, P2V, so effectively taking a physical machine, turning it into a container or a virtual machine. It also can import other containers or virtual machines from an existing system, and it can do that over the network, either to a standalone Incus server or to a cluster. Now, what we've added this time around are quite a few useful features. So up till now, what you could do was just point it at either a file system tree or a disk and have that be imported as a new instance. That also supported things like VMDK and QCAR2 formats for disks, so not just raw disks, but some of the compressed options too. But that was it. If your system required multiple disks, you couldn't really import those. You had to manually handle those completely separately from this process, and then attach that back to the instance post transfer. Now it's possible to handle those in two different ways. The first way is you can simply point incus-migrate directly at a file system tree or raw disk and tell it, I would like this to turn into a custom volume. So not a new instance, just a new custom volume, which you can then attach to existing instances on the Incus side. Or you can use the same feature as part of creating a new instance with that tool. So if you're importing either the physical system or a VM that's currently on it, you can now ask for additional disks to be also transferred as part of the migration, causing like a full-fledged instance on the target, including its extra drives. Once we had that supported, that made it possible to also handle OVA images. So those are kind of standard virtual machine images, primarily used by the likes of VMware and VirtualBox, quite often used to distribute appliances. And the way that basically works is that it's a zip file which contains a bunch of disks and a bit of extra metadata as XML. So now incus-migrate also understands that disk format. It can unpack it, it can figure out the different disks and import that onto the target as part of the migration. And when dealing with a remote cluster, one thing that was kind of missing was the ability to instruct incus-migrate on to exactly what server we want the instance to land on. That can be relevant if machines are a bit different within the cluster and you don't want one to be picked at random. I recently had that case actually for a customer of mine where they were moving a AI machine, so a machine with GPU needed to be moved specifically to a server within a cluster that also supported GPUs. So that was a good reason for also wanting that particular feature to be added. So that's it for incus-migrate. It's really quite a lot of changes to that tool. We're trying to make it kind of the go-to standalone tool that you can download, run on a machine, point it to your Incus deployment, and then move the data across to it. Next, there's been a bit of work towards expanding the APIs on custom storage volumes, specifically for those of the file system type. We want to get to the point where you can have the same file operations against a custom storage volume as you can against an instance. We're not there yet, but with this release, we have support for the SFTP API, which is kind of the core file API we're using these days. And that means you can use incus storage volume file mount command at this point. And the other commands are going to come most likely in Incus 6.14. Then we've got a few network-related features, specifically Oven-related. So those using Oven with network forward to take an external IP address and forward it to a single instance, you can now make that the primary IP address of the instance, so that whatever external connection that instance might make in the future, it's going to come from the IP address of its network forward. That's pretty useful if you're using the network forward as effectively a floating IP that you only assign to a single instance. Now you can set that property on the instance NIC to make sure the return path is the one you'd expect. Still on Oven, we've got now the ability to pin the MAC address of a gateway. That's because Oven doesn't really do standard ARP or NDP to detect the MAC address of its gateway. It effectively does it as a one-time action, where it will resolve the MAC address, but then not really try ever again. That can be a problem in environments with multiple virtual routers that might then share a MAC address through VRRP. If you don't have a way to really pin the correct MAC address, you run the risk of Oven learning the wrong MAC address and then goes through a specific router, which looks like it's all working until that router goes down and you're not using the virtual MAC, you're using the physical MAC, and now you lose connectivity. So with that option, it's now possible to specifically set the MAC address of the router you do want to use, and Oven will effectively use that consistently. Then we've got a couple of changes to virtual machines. One is to tweak the way the time clock works when we are not expecting to migrate, so that effectively aligns that changes the clock tick rate in a way that's that doesn't really work when you need to migrate, because the source and target servers might not share the same. But if the instance is not marked as migratable, we can use that trick to give a bit more performance. So that's now done automatically. The other thing is Incus now keeps track of RTC, so real-time clock changes from within the VM. So if the VM changes, like flushes its offset to the physical clock, we now keep track of that value and reapply it on reboot. The main effect of that is that if you change time zones within Windows, for example, then the time will be correct after reboot. Before that, we had a bit of an issue with Windows because it always stores the local time instead of the UTC time in the real time clock. And so if you were we already had detection for that, so effectively we were running QEMU with local time instead of UTC time when we knew we were dealing with Windows. But if the time zone of the Windows machine is not the same as the time zone of the host, we still had problems, and every reboot you would see a big offset that could cause problems. So now with this logic, things should be consistent, so you can reboot your Windows VM and the time will remain the same, basically. We've also got now a couple of commands, extra command line commands to deal with the client certificate. The first one is to just allow reading the client certificate. Nothing particularly fancy, it just saves you from having to read a file. You can run a command instead and it will pick the file wherever it is. And the second is to then use that client certificate to to derive effectively a JSON web token that can be used in an environment where you can't use the client certificate to connect. So if you go through like a reverse proxy that terminates TLS effectively. We used to have a test tool that could do that, but now the command line tool itself can do it directly, which is a bit cleaner. For OCI containers, we've had a DHCP client built in that would handle initial IP configuration, but that client could only do IPv4. So now we have DHCP v6 support, both stateless and stateful, within our DHCP client, so that if you're in an environment where you're trying to specify a specific IPv6 address, it will work. And similarly, the DNS server will also be pulled from DHCP v6 now. Then for those using rooted NICs, we had a config key called IPv4 and IPv6 host table, which would let you override what table to put the roots into, the default being the main routing table. But that was effectively, I believe, handled as like an extra table. So it was still landing in the main table, which is not what everyone wanted, especially in environments using VRFs and the like, and also was limited to a single table. So now that config key is deprecated, and we instead have IPv4 host tables and IPv6 host tables. Those config keys default still to the main table, but if they are set, they will override the full list of tables, which lets you effectively tell Incus not to put roots in the main routing table and to then put it in whatever other tables you'd like. Next up, we've got support for split image publishing. That's been asked quite a while back, actually. And just as a refresher, Incus effectively has two different image formats. One is a unified format, which is just a single tarball or tarball equivalent, which includes the metadata and then either a directory or a file, which represents the root disk. So it's typically a directory for a container or a file for a VM. That's the native format that we have internally. But then for basically all of our images, we always use a split format instead, where we have a small tarball with just the metadata and then a raw file alongside it, which is either a tarball for containers or a QCAR2 image for VMs, which includes just the root disk. The advantage of that particular setup is that the root part of it is not tied to Incus at all. So that makes it easier to reuse those images with other virtualization platforms. And that's what we do on our image servers, because both LXC and Incus use the same images. So now the support inside of Incus publish for that format. So you can do publish with -- format equals split, and you end up with two files instead of one. So effectively getting a split image that way. On the server preceding side of things, we have now support for passing a list of certificates. So effectively giving a list of certificates to trust within the Incus trust store during server initialization. That's particularly useful because of our efforts on Incus OS, where those systems don't have normal SSH or any kind of way to run an interactive command to trust a new certificate or to generate a new trust token. Instead, during the initial boot, provisioning needs to pre-trust everything that's needed. And we handle provisioning by using Incus Preseed, which, since they were lacking a way to add trust certificates, that was a bit annoying. Now with that sorted, that makes it quite a bit easier for Incus OS provisioning, but will also be useful to many others who might find themselves in a similar situation. Then we've debuted the ability, like a new section in our CLI config tool configuration called defaults, which allows us to apply kind of command-wide default behaviors. And the first one to be added is a list, configurable list formats. So maybe you like the compact output more, maybe you'd like to hide the header, maybe you've got some other preferences on the output you'd like. Now you can do it by just setting a config key directly inside the config file, setting the behavior you'd like as far as what's returned, and that will override the default behavior while still allowing you to override it on a per command basis when you run it. Then still on the CLI side, we've added a lot of aliases across the command. So we've got that behavior where if you like to, from a model point of view on our side, anything that may result in data loss or any object that's of great significance that's actually kind of used, that stores state effectively, you typically create it. So use a create command, and that means use a delete command to get rid of it. Whereas relations between objects and smaller configuration entries that are not likely to cause data loss, they're typically added and then removed. So that's the add and remove command. That's the general pattern we've got across the entire CLI. So if you've seen both of the combos, that's what that is. That's why it's done that way. That's why it's not necessarily consistent. It's because it's actually consistent as far as the general design. But when trying to script or when trying to figure out what commands are available, it's not always the easiest. So we've now found a middle ground and effectively added a bunch of aliases kind of across the command line tool so that you can still use one or the other. The help will only show the correct one, but if you use remove instead of delete or delete instead of remove or that kind of thing, it will still effectively function by being treated as an alias internally. Then we've got a few kind of code base wide initiatives we've been going through recently. Some of those were already in 6.13, 6.12, and then are being continued within 6.13. So the first one is conversion of a bunch of manual database code to using a database generator instead, so using standard functions. And in this release, we're doing it for network ACLs, network load balancers, and network zones. There are more open pull requests to convert, I believe, another 2 or 3. We're just trying to pace it a bit because that's reasonably high risk. We obviously have a pretty comprehensive test suite on Incus, and we will have also manual tests, and we've got daily tests, and we've been making sure that they all pass. But that's still a lot of different code paths changing every time we do those kind of changes, and so the risk of having missed something, a typo somewhere, or some edge cases we missed is reasonably high. So we've done these 3. If you're dealing with ACLs, load balancers, or zones, and you see some behavior that has changed or that's looking weird, please file an issue and we'll look into it. But yeah, we've got more of those coming through, and the plan is to get rid of all manually written database code within Incus so that we can avoid potential security issues, potential bugs, and just have things be nicely consistent. Now, the next kind of code base wide initiative that we have is server-side filtering. So as I believe I mentioned during the 6.12 release video, we've had the API side of this for a little while now. So it's effectively on the client side that we're making it so all of those list commands, they use server-side filtering instead of requesting all of the data and then filtering it on the client side. So we've been effectively putting that logic in place command by command, and now we've got another 4 being handled in this release. I believe we might have a couple left, but we're getting pretty close to the end. Next, pretty similar, code-generated documentation. So that's another case where we used to have to make changes for config keys in 2 locations, both in the code and in the documentation. It was pretty easy to miss doing one or the other. So we've been moving to effectively generating all of the documentation from annotations within the code itself and slowly converting things over. So with this release, we're now moving PCI devices and 4 of the network types. So the other network type, physical, SIOV, and MAC VLANs are all moved over to the generator now. That shouldn't really cause any difference in the documentation unless we missed something during the conversion, but it's gonna ensure consistency and avoid issues in the future. And last on the list is also related to Incus OS. So on Incus OS, again, we don't get a local shell. It's very locked down. There's effectively a single port that's open, which is the Incus port itself. And that means that for OS system-wide metrics, we want them reported through Incus. So that's what we've added effectively. If we detect we're on Incus OS, we are hitting the local node exporter and including the metrics automatically within the Incus metrics, which then allows for a single endpoint to scrape to get not only the instance metrics, but also the system-wide metrics. And that's it for this release. One thing I forgot to mention, and you might have seen it on screen, a lot of the features were contributed by students of the University of Texas in Austin. We still have a few PRs left to review. Obviously, they had a deadline on their side, and that caused a lot of pull requests to be open all at once. And we don't want to necessarily merge them all in one release either due to potential risk of regressions. So this is already a very busy release. 6.14 is gonna have the rest of the pull requests that are currently open. So it's probably another 4 or 5 features from that university on top of whatever else we end up working on in this release. And now let's go and take a look at those features. So first up is Windows Agent. Let me switch over to a terminal here. It's always a bit ironic when dealing with Windows, but here we go. So I do have Windows running, and I don't believe I've got the agent actually running right now. So if I try to interact with it, which would be something like this is not responding. Same thing if I try to pull details on Windows, we don't really get any details on the OS or anything that way. Now, if I go check on that VM, all right. Now I'm on Windows, and if we go look, I have a agent drive attached to it. So that's just a normal Incus agent drive, same thing you do with CentOS and the like. Then I can get a terminal in there. And if we look, there is a binary called incus-agent.exe. So that's what we're going to want to run. So come on. Oops, what's going on with that terminal now? Okay, just PowerShell being slow. Incus-agent.exe. What's wrong now? Did I make a typo? No. Does it look like I don't know Windows much? Okay, there we go. So that should be running now. And with that running, if we go look again, now we've got details on the operating system. So it's Windows 11 Pro, we've got the build, we've got detail on the host name, FQDN, all of that. And also we've got a process count now. So we've got some details coming out of the agent basically immediately. And more importantly, I can actually run commands on Windows. So we can get PowerShell, we can start moving to different drives possibly. Yeah, there we go. We can list files, etc. You might have noticed I had to do -T. That gets us into non-interactive mode. It's because our logic currently cannot locate PTY equivalents on Windows. It's just a bit tricky and messy, and I don't know Windows well enough for that. So if anyone wants to tackle that and get a proper interactive command with Windows, that'd be great. It would clean up a few things in the user experience. Now, you can also do file transfers. So let's see. The syntax might be slightly odd, but let's see what I've got on Windows. I think I've got a file on the desktop, maybe. Let's see. I believe I had like a hello world type thing. Oh, there's a file called foo here that says hello world. Okay, let's see if we can pull that. If I go here, I'll do incus file pull, and we want so win11, and then C users. What's my? I don't actually remember my username now on there. Maybe it's just that. Hopefully it is. And then it's desktop and foo.txt. Because of the backslashes, I probably should do something like this. File does not exist. Okay, let's go see. Okay, what's the C drive actually like? Okay, so users. All right, so it's the full name and then desktop and foo.txt. Okay. All right, let's try that again. There you go. So yeah, our file transfer API works basically as expected, except you need to deal with the file if you've got a bunch of backslashes in there. But that does let you access the drive on Windows just fine. And that's for most of the features we have. We can do exec, we can do file transfers, and we can get some info from the agent. In this case, I'm running the agent directly as my own user. So that's what we could see. What we could see here. For a more persistent behavior, you probably want to create a service using the svc command and get that as a service, and then decide if you want to run it as your user or if you want to run it instead as a system service. That's kind of up to you, and that's where I hope we get some people with more Windows experience to also come up with like an install PowerShell script or something that's a bit cleaner than what I'm doing right now. But yeah, we've got the agent working on Windows now. Next, we have improvements to incus-migrate. So let's see. I'm probably not gonna do a full demo of that because I don't necessarily have everything to show, but for anyone who's might not have seen incus-migrate before, that might be useful to just show it. So if we target just the local Incus server, we can see some of the commands that are supported. So we can import just a basic container, virtual machine, import a OVA image or custom volume. So the custom volume option is new. So for example, I should be able to do this, name of the pool, say default, demo etsy, and let's say I want to import /etsy in there and go. And now that means I've got a new volume here called demo etsy, which is going to contain the content of my /etsy. So that's for the custom, for the new custom volume feature. I could also have passed here the path to an actual disk image, which would then have been loaded as a disk image instead. So let's actually try that real quick. So just do yes, custom, name of the pool is default. Let's do demo image, and please provide the path to a disk or file system. Let me just find a file of some kind. Bit of a bad example, honestly, but let's just do, say, this Vertio drive, which is an ISO. You shouldn't really import it like that. It would be better done as importing it as an ISO image instead, but that should still work. So do you want to continue? Yes. And we can see it shows type block. So it's going to import it as a block device, so as a disk that can be attached to a VM. And then it's going through the actual file. It's going to take a little while longer. I don't remember how large that thing is. It's like a few hundred megs, I think. 693. Okay, so it's going to take a little while to actually go through the whole thing. But that's for that feature. Now, while this is going on, we can just run another session of incus-migrate to kind of look at some of the other options. And say we wanted to import, I don't know, a virtual machine. Let's call it foo, path to the file. I mean, let's just pretend that this is a virtual machine, and it will be in secure boot. And now, so you can see what it will transfer as the main disk for the virtual machine. But now you also have option 6, which is the new option here, to add additional disks. So again, we can choose the pool because a extra disk can be on a different pool. I just have one, so it's still default. And then name of the custom volume. So we can call it like extra or something, like instance called food, so food-extra, something like that. And then provide the path to this thing. Okay, just keep using the same file. But now we can see it would import and attach that disk to the VM. We can do the same thing with containers. So when dealing with a VM, you can attach either an extra file system volume or block volume. If you're dealing with a container, it's just a file system volume that can be imported that way. And next, if we, okay, and I just finished the import up here. So if we go look, we should have demo img is there, it's imported. So let's delete that. Okay. And the other new feature in there is support for OVA, which I've not actually tested yet. So maybe I'm missing some tools on my machine. We're all gonna discover that together. So provide the path to the OVA, sure. So it's that. Name of the pool, let's do default. Name of the instance, test OVA. Does it support secure boot? Well, probably. UEFI in secure boot? Probably. It's an Ubuntu image. So 2 CPUs, 1 gig of RAM, lands in default pool. Can I change the volume size? Yes, so it's 4. So pool we already answered that, but okay. Do you want to change the size? Yes. Let's give it 50 gigs, just to be safe that we have enough space. And then let's go. All right, yeah. So incus-migrate is normally not really running on a local system. Instead, you usually run it on the source machine, and in this case, it needs QEMU image to do its job. That's not really a problem. I actually have a copy of QEMU image that I can use, but I need to tweak my lookup path a bit because this is my development system with incus-migrate itself is built from source, so I need to have it show up before the system path, and then QEMU image is in opt-incus bin, so I need to do that. And then I'm gonna need to be able to load libraries from opt-incus lib there. So now I should have QEMU image. I do, and let's just pretend that none of that happened. And let's go again. So import OVA, and where was that path? There. Okay. Default pool, name of the instance, test OVA. Yep, secure boot is fine. Change the disk size, default, yes, 50 gigs, go. All right, so this time so basically what that does, an OVA is a fancy zip file. So it unpacks the zip file, it parsed some amount of the metadata, got the disk out of it, converts the disk to a raw image, and then sends that over to Incus as the root disk. I'm not actually sure how big that thing is. So I guess we can check. I've never tried that particular image, so I guess we can. Oops. 557 megs. Okay. And clearly it's bigger than that, but that's the VMDK. Do we have a raw file? No. Okay. So I need to run QEMU image info, but I don't have it in my path. So anyways, let's leave it importing that. I'm not sure what the default size is for the image. I've said 50 gigs. Hopefully it doesn't expand to something quite that large. It's probably a few gigs at most. And then that should give us a working VM. The remaining feature is actually dealing with clusters. So for that, let's try it again. So incus-migrate. So if we say no, we're not dealing with the local server, we want to deal with a remote server. I can do, for example, my home cluster. Is it cloud.zambly.com? Okay, and then I can consume a certificate token, which I need to actually generate. Just add on that cluster and just call it migrate. So that gives me a one-time token I can pass here. And now I can go and import something. So let's say we do a virtual machine, project to create instance in, sure, we can leave default. And now we've got the extra question, which is, would you like to target a specific server? If we say yes, then I could give the name of a server I want and then move on. So that's the extra question that was added as part of this. All right, so let's cancel that. And let's look at what happened with our OVA. So if we do config on it, okay, you can see 50 gigs root disk, CPU memory is set, and that's it. So let's see if I do test OVA console VGA. Let's see if that boots. Don't expect that we'll necessarily have the agent in there. That's just a stock Ubuntu image. It might have the LXD agent loader, which would be enough to get us a working agent within Incus, but it also might not. So I guess we'll see. But that clearly got imported and can boot. So incus-migrate did its job effectively. Let's see if we get lucky with the agent. But... Yep, okay. So the LXD agent loader is there, and that gets us the Incus agent. Cool. So that's it for incus-migrate improvements. The next thing is SFTP on custom volumes. So that's the beginning of the new storage API on it. Now let me check what I have as far as storage volumes to have anything interesting. List default custom. Okay, so that's the only two that would work are these two. They're a bit weird because they're the ones storing Incus images and files. I'm not completely sure they will work, but we can give it a shot. So we need a mount point, and then storage volume file mount, storage pool, name of the volume, target path. Okay, that's mounted. And we can see the content. So yeah, I worked just fine. And that's effectively the beginning of that API. It does let you do whatever you want with it through that SSHFS type mount. And then once we add more, you're gonna get the remaining commands. Right now we only have mount in here. But if we look at the instance equivalent, we normally have a bunch more commands, and those will show up soon. Next, we've got a couple of oven features. So let me switch over to that. Remote demo. Okay, so that should be a cluster running a recent enough version of Incus that has oven running. So I can load my config to access the oven deployments. There we go. And then we can look around a bit. So if I look at my network list on there, and we look at the default network, what do we have? Okay, I thought I did configure the gateway MAC address on one of them. I just don't remember which. So that's on default, maybe test or test oven. Let's see. Test. Nope. Oven. Nope. Okay. Did I just clear that config? Nope. Because I don't actually know what the gateway MAC address is. I guess I could figure it out easily enough. Not actually sure. Because it goes through an external network to reach the gateway. I mean, I can check in oven actually. Let's do that. So sbctl show MAC binding, list MAC binding. Anyway, so that's the internal, the oven internal list of all of the MAC addresses bindings. Now, if we go look at the specific networks, say the default network, we can see it's on this subnet 172.31.254.10. Its gateway is going to be on .1. So if we look for an entry in here, we should see that. There we go. And we can see that its normal MAC address for this IP address here is this Incus MAC address here. Okay, so now say you had some kind of weird behavior with a bunch of different. Oh, actually, I think it is configured. Anyways, so say you've got an environment with virtual routers in place, multiple routers, and you want to pin the MAC address. What you need to do is not actually modify your virtual network; it's modify its uplink. So if we go look at the uplink here, I think we'll see that it's already configured actually. Yeah. So uplink network, we can see the IP address of the gateway and the IPv6 address of the gateway, and we can also see that the MAC address is pinned to that value we've seen earlier. So that's basically how that works. If you need to specify a very specific MAC address for a given gateway, you can do it that way. Now I'm trying to remember, the other feature was the ability to use IPv4 address external, IPv6 address external. I don't remember if this environment is suitable for that, but I can check if we've got any instance that uses the feature already, because if it does, then that's where I tested it and therefore it works. Let's see. Devices, dot. Okay, yeah, so there is one VM here. So if we go check that VM, so Red Hat 9v3, we can see it's got an external IP address set, so that's one of the new features, and it resides on the default network. So if we go look at details for the default network, yeah, so the default network, when going to the outside world, will normally go out with 172.31.254.10. But there must be forward in place on this network. So if we go look at the list of forwards, we can see the forward IP address 172.31.254.50 goes to IP address, to this IP address, which is gonna match our RH9v3, was it? Yeah, so it's the same IP address, which then means that we have now, this VM should have normal connectivity to the outside world, but when it talks to the outside, instead of coming out of the NAT address for the network, it comes out of its external address that it got through a forward. So it effectively lets you do NAT both ways with forwards by picking specific instances and telling them what IP address they need to use for new egress traffic. Alrighty, next is clock handling in VMs. I mean, there's not too much to show on that. If I just switch back to my local server, and we look at, say, Windows, so Win 11, we can actually see here that there is configuration now to track the real-time clock. So right now it effectively shows adjustment of 0, offset -1, so there's basically no offset currently in place. If we go in Windows and we change time zone, we should see something, I think. So currently my local time and VM time is the same, so that's why there's no offset. But if I go and pretend that I'm not on Eastern time, but I'm on Central time, now there should be an offset of an hour compared to the host. So we should see it show up as here 3600 on top of the default 1 second offset. So that's effectively working. And if we then move back, when Windows adjusts the real-time clock again, we'll be fine. And I think the 1 second is probably just because of NTP. Maybe we can resync it to not even have that delta. I don't know. Let's try it. So if we just reset the automatic time, that's taking a little while. Come on. Why isn't TP taking so long suddenly on Windows? Yeah, okay, it's stuck. So anyway, that should normally then have cleared the 1 second difference, but let's see what it did. No, we're currently back to 1 second. It might clear once it does finally resync. So anyway, that lets you do time zone offset on Windows compared to the host, reboot, and still keep the time be correct and not have that like multi-hours out of sync time every time. Next are a couple of new commands in the CLI. So incus remote and then get client certificate that will show you the public certificate that the client is using. And then we can do get client token, which derives a certificate for you, and you can set an expiry. So let's do a 30 seconds token, so nobody can use it. That gets you a JSON Web Token derived from that client certificate that can then be used for a period of 30 seconds. Or, normally a longer time period, like a day or something, but in this case, 30 seconds will do. The rooted NIC, I can't really show it, and it's pretty niche. So for anyone who needs the ability to set host tables, you can do it. There's configuration for it now, but I don't use rooted NICs locally, so I can't really show you that feature. Then split image publishing. So we can show easily enough. So if I create a new instance with Alpine Edge, say, okay. If I publish this A1 as alias Alpine Unified, that's the default format. Sure, I can force it, doesn't matter. There we go. And then if we want to do one in split format, okay, just go in a random empty directory, and then we export the first image. So we export Alpine Unified. We can see a single file, which includes the root file system, but then the other files are separate within the same tarball. Now, if we do export the split one instead. We get 2 files instead of 1. And if we look at the metadata, it only has the metadata, and then the other file has the entire root file system. So that's for that particular feature. Next is preceding of a certificate. I don't really have that handy or a good way to really show it, but there's an example in the announcement in our documentation to just show how to add certificates. So that's pretty straightforward. Next up is the CLI. So the CLI configuration specifically. Here we can see just a list of instances. And if I want to change the configuration for that, I can edit the configuration file, go down to the default section and say you want compact as the list output, and now you get compact. Or you can, if you don't like headers, you can do list, it's list no header, table no header, table no header somehow. Yeah, now you've got the table without the header line. Or you can just remove the entire section and get back to the normal behavior. Next up are a bunch of aliases, as I mentioned. So in this case for containers, if I want to delete A1, I would need to do delete, but now I can also do rm, I can do remove. Those are available kind of throughout the CLI now for convenience. And the rest are all features I can't really demo because they're just kind of internal refactoring and improvements. So that's the conversion of manual DB functions, the server-side filtering. I mean, if I do network list, for example, this is done through server-side filtering. So, but this is just the behavior we had before is just more optimized now. Then we've got code-generated documentation, which if we've done it right, you shouldn't really see any difference. And OS metrics that only reworks on Incus OS, which I do have one running, so I might be able to show that actually. If I go in this VM, no, okay. Let me just check what's going on, but this is my development VM and I wasn't really planning on showing it, so there's a good chance it's just stuck. Oh, it's simply not booted, okay. That I can fix. So just let it boot into Incus OS. And then once this is booted, we should be able, okay, it's done. If it can bring up Incus itself, then we'll be able to check on that. Starting application, system ready. Okay, cool. So if I go in there, Incus query 1.0 metrics, we can see it returns a lot more than usual because we've got all of the node underscore type metrics are being reported as part of this. And just as a reminder, Incus OS is currently under active development. We don't actually want anyone to start using it at this point. But we keep adding that kind of integration and those small changes to just make the experience be good by the time we actually are ready. By the time we're actually ready for people to start using it. All right, I think that's everything in this new Incus release. So as mentioned, quite a long list, quite a lot of new features. This is like packages are becoming available now as usual. Just be careful, there's a lot of changes in there. So maybe don't roll it out on every single machine at the same time. If you're doing anything pretty complex, especially around ACLs, load balancers, or network zones, just make sure that everything still looks good before you start rolling it out more widely. And if you find any issue or anything, feel free to mention either right here on YouTube or on our forum, or file an issue on GitHub. In either case, we'll track it and fix it. All right, well, that was quite the release. Hopefully you like this quick go through of all of the new features. If you've got any questions or anything, feel free to leave them down below. Feel free to go on the community forum, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.